For this chapter 7.1, quiz 6.1, you have to use the sum and difference identities to evaluate exactly. So these are the identities. Okay? Sine of u plus or minus v equals sine of u cosine of v plus or minus cosine of u sine of v. Cosine of u plus or minus v equals cosine of u cosine of v reverse plus or minus sine of u sine of v. So how can we use these formulas to solve this problem? Okay. So for example, you have sine of pi over 12. What you need to do is almost like a guessing game. What two angles can I add or subtract to get pi over 12? Well, my first guess is pi over 3 and pi over 4. So pi over 3, pi over 4. Why did I guess that? Where did that come from? Well, whenever you add or subtract, you need a common denominator, right? So the common denominator between 3 and 4 is 12. So that means that I'm adding or subtracting these two fractions. But what would be the order? And what would I be doing? If I add these two fractions, I will have 7 pi over 12, which clearly is not what I want. So that tells me that I need to subtract. Now, the order of subtraction is this one right here, pi over 3 minus pi over 4. Because by having a common denominator, this becomes 4 pi over 12 minus 3 pi over 12, which gives me pi over 12. So in reality, sine of pi over 12 is the same thing as sine of pi over 3 minus pi over 4. Now that I know that, I can use the formula. So again, sine of pi over 3 minus pi over 4 equals, well, the formula tells me is sine of pi over 3 cosine of pi over 4. Now it says if it's plus, it's plus. If it's minus, it's minus. So minus cosine of pi over 3 is sine of pi over 4. Now what is that equal to? Well, sine of pi over 3 is square root of 3 over 2. Cosine of pi over 4, square root of 2 over 2. Minus cosine of pi over 3 is 1/2. And sine of pi over 4, square root of 2 over 2. Which gives me, well, square root of 3 times square root of 2 is square root of 6. And 2 times 2 is 4. Minus square root of 2 over 4. Since we have a common denominator, we can put it in the same denominator. Square root of 6 minus square root of 2 over 4. That will be your answer for that problem. Now let's do the same thing for cosine of 75 degrees. Well, again, do we know two angles that if you add them or subtract them gives you 75? Again, I will use 45 degrees and 30 degrees. And how am I going to use it? Well, you guessed it, adding them. So 45 degrees plus 30 degrees. What is that equal to? Well, using the formula, it says that if it's cosine of addition, you have to flip it to subtraction. And then the cosines go first, the sines second. So this is equal to, let me change the color. It's going to be cosine 45 cosine of 30 minus sine 45 sine of 30. Now, what is the cosine of 45? Well, square root of 2 over 2. Cosine of 30 is the same thing as cosine of pi over 6, which is the same thing as square root of 3 over 2. Minus sine of 45, square root of 2 over 2. And sine of 30 is 1/2. Which is equal to square root of 6 over 4 minus square root of 2 over 4, which gives me exactly square root of 6 minus square root of 2 over 4. Notice that that's exactly what we got from our previous answer. Okay? If you have any questions, leave it in the comments below or ask me in class if you're in my class. Thank you.